We invite you to worship with Tabernacle Baptist Church. 5 services, multiple locations. Tabernacle, Maine, 1223 Laney Walker Boulevard, Augusta, Georgia, 7:15 a.m., 9:45 a.m., and 12:15 p.m. And Tabernacle West, 702 North Bel Air Road, Evans, Georgia, 9 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. The year started out great. We had goals and dreams that we wanted to accomplish. Trips we wanted to take, friends we wanted to visit. It was supposed to be our year. At least that's what we heard. Then, bam! George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, coronavirus, thousands dead, economic instability, political polarization, racial division, goals, setback, dreams deferred, trips canceled, anxiety heightened. Just a cloud of confusion. All of these have left us declaring it's time for a mental break.
Where it's all about God's people, TBC, making an impact. Where it's all about God's people, TBC, making an impact. Welcome to the Kingdom Living Broadcast with the Reverend Dr. Charles E. Goodman. Making an impact.
Then he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud all over the blind man's eyes. He told him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. As I've challenged you to get some sleep and get some time away today for the final installment, I want to talk about get some help. Get some help. Lord, speak. We need to hear. I believe honestly, truly, and I need you to hear me and give me some space to really explain this. One of the most dangerous statements that perhaps we can ever state is the most dangerous statement is saying, as long as I got Jesus, I got everything I need. And you're right from a spiritual standpoint. But I do think that that statement has been taken way out of context. Because yes, Jesus is very significant and important and central to our faith. But through the work of Christ and others, God allows partnerships and collaborations along with the miraculous work of Jesus to also bring us to a place of healing and deliverance. One of the challenges that can happen, and I see this especially amongst Christians, people who claim to love God and have faith, is that sometimes our perspective can be skewed. We can be a little too myopic in our perspective, not understanding that if we stay too singly focused on one aspect of our faith, that we will not open ourselves up to the possibilities and potential that can be explored through other expressions of our faith. In other words, what I'm here to argue and simply to offer to us today is that when we think about it, yes, Jesus alone is central for salvation. But I also want to make the argument that Jesus and others are essential for our healing and our deliverance. That yes, we need Jesus, and that alone, on Jesus alone are we saved. But when it comes to this idea of healing and deliverance, and especially as we've been navigating through our mental space and our emotional capacity, is I want to offer that God gives to us different gifts and resources that helps us in moments to get the help that we need. When you think about the benevolence of God, God really gives us 3 things in moments of crisis. Number 1, he gives us spiritual resources. And Psalm 46:1 says that God is our present help. Have you ever thought about what that term means? That term present help in the Hebrew means he's our proven help. In other words, when the psalmist declaring this, what he was saying is that whenever we are in a bind, whenever we are in places of uncertainty, God himself is a proven help. God himself throughout time has always shown up and shown out. In times of crisis, God allows us to have spiritual resources. But not only spiritual resources, I also want to suggest that he gives us personal resources. It's those things internally that allow us to expand and to grow as our faith is. It's the moments of triumph in our lives. I always tell people that if you really want to progress in God, you need to have a good memory. Because for many of the situations we're in, it's not the first situation we're in, but we have a proven track record of what God has been able to accomplish. God gives us spiritual resources. He gives us personal resources, but then he also gives us interpersonal resources. In other words, I've said this on many occasions, and it is true, that one of the great resources that God gives us is the resource of relationship. And I believe for many of us, especially in time like this, what we need is to make sure that we have a solid, strong network of interpersonal resources. Whether it's a family member that you can trust in, whether it's friends that can be there for you in times of need, and yes, even spiritually inclined and people like counselors and therapists. I know you're arguing and looking at me, well, I got Jesus PG, that's all I need. But once again, I believe that God gives us others. God allows other avenues, other expressions of deliverance in order to help you and I receive the help that we need. That's what we see in John chapter 9. And as we began to look at the book of John, John himself paints an incredible picture as he shares with you and I the narrative of Jesus. John is big on symbolism. When we studied the book of John, the 7 I am statements, the 7 miracles of John, and John chapter 9 is one of those miracles. It's the healing of the man that's born blind. You've heard this story. I've preached this narrative. I have looked over it. But in the consultation and prayer and figuring out which direction God would want us to go in this series, God reimagined me to come once again to John chapter 9. And in this particular narrative, you and I know that the man who's born blind gets his sight back. But verses 6 and 7 tells us this unique partnership, this collaboration, if you will, that takes place. That Jesus, when he meets the man, puts mud on the man's eyes. But watch what happens in verse number 7 of this text of John 9, that here is this man with mud on his eyes, and he's sent to a pool called Siloam. And the text says at the end of verse 7 that after leaving Jesus with mud on his face and now washing in the pool, the man can now see. In other words, what God arrested me with is this interesting tag team between Jesus and the pool. It is Jesus that initiates the miracle, but it's the pool that finalizes the reality for the man to see. And in that moment, God began to speak to me and say, Goodman, notice how this man received his deliverance and healing. It did not come through just the work of Jesus, but he also had a pool he could wash in as well. And I want to submit for you today that yes, we need Jesus. Jesus is the one that is the author and the finisher of our faith. But I also want to suggest you and I need some pools. We need some places of refreshment, some places that you and I can wash ourselves in to complete the healing that God has for you and I. I know, my brothers and sisters, it sounds strange, but I appreciate what this blind man teaches us in the text, because none of us can be above washing in the pools that we're sent to. And I understand, I see why this sermon, this kind of talk is dangerous, because for many of us, even Christian leaders especially, there's a stigma when it comes to getting some help. We don't want people to know our business. It's the main thing that we say. It could either be shame. We don't like to talk about these areas of our lives that can be very painful, or it can be embarrassing if you allow yourself the vulnerability to open yourself up to others for them to know every aspect of you. But as my grandma once taught me as a little boy, that I ran in the house, I had cut myself profusely, I was bleeding, and I came to her crying and in pain, and I told Grandma I'm hurt myself, and Grandma, in her effort to try to help me, was trying to get me, but I was trying to hide where I was hurt. And this was the revelation that Grandma gave me in that moment. She said, Charlie, I can't heal what you keep trying to hide. And for you and I, that's really what life is like if we think about it. It's been tough. The emotional scars of what we've been dealing with are becoming too much for us to hide. The physical outpouring and pain is becoming too much for us to hide. And I wonder how many of you who are listening today, how many of you are partaking in this message, understand what it is to go through a period where you're just at a point of breaking down. Everything seems to be coming in at one time. And here's the truth: unless you learn how to expand yourself, yes, you need Jesus, but you also need a pool. And my simple aim today is to create for you and I the acceptance of the fact that it's okay to get some help. Yes, you need some sleep, and yes, you need some time away, but hear me clearly, child of God, you also need some help. And I really want to make it okay for us to develop this theology of collaboration. Yes, I need the supernatural power of Jesus, but I'm also grateful for the natural work of others who God has ordained to finish the work that Jesus has started. I'm grateful for the counselors and the therapists and the friends and those who are discerning that can help us navigate through moments when we cannot figure things else out by ourselves. I, like this blind man, have spent enough time with mud on my face. I'm grateful that God gives us pools to wash in. Because at the end of the day, it was only after the washing in the pool did the man come back seeing. It almost seems to suggest that it was an incomplete miracle, that just leaving Jesus alone would have kept him with dirt on his face. But with Jesus and the pool, the man got the vision that he so sorely lacked. And maybe that's what I want to challenge you and I, because here's your takeaway truth, is that if you and I are to embrace this moment and to get through this rough year, to navigate through health issues and economic problems, and yes, even political uncertainty, yes, even the loss of friends and lack of touch and love with loved ones, I'm here to tell you it's going to take Jesus and a pool. It's going to take someone that God has ordained to help us navigate this thorny patch, to walk us through the valley of the shadow of death, and yes, even to comfort us in times and moments of just crazy uncertainty. And I really want us to look at that, because I wonder, what is it, especially as we look at this man, and I'm going to be as topical as possible. There's a few things that I think we can learn from this man, this blind man, who leaves Jesus with mud on his face, but goes to the pool of Siloam and washes it off to complete his healing. Let me share a couple things. I want you to jot these down. I really want us to really think through these together. This is one of those interactive dialogue type of sermons. I'm going to give you some principles, but what I really think would make this sermon more practical and impactful for your life is, as we engage with it in a few moments that we have in the preaching moment, is that you write these down, get you a journal, talk to someone. How can I navigate through these areas so that I can make sure that I'm getting beyond the stigma of trying to get some help? Because here is my fear for many of us, is that we know we need help and still refuse to get it. Why not use what God has allowed for you and I to experience to complete the utter deliverance and healing that he so desires for our lives? I really want us to think through that. So here's the first thing that I want us to really ponder as we consider, how do we overcome the stigma of getting some help? Well, first of all, and I'm giving all these in present active imperatives, the first thing that we do to overcome the stigma of getting some help is that, first of all, we must go about the business of resisting the temptation to personalize our issue. This might be one of the hardest aspects of this passage, and yes, for you in our lives. When we introduce this man in John chapter 9, it's interesting. We learn something about him. He's a man that's been born blind. It literally means that he never had the ability to see ever before. This condition of blindness ultimately is what allowed him to get in the radar, if you will, of Jesus. Because when Jesus meets him, he's blind, but he's also begging. He's begging because he has to make a living, even though his condition has severely limited a lot of his life. To not have sight is huge. Matter of fact, it's perhaps our most dominant sense. Most of our brain is then focused and wired toward our sight. For him to be blind meant that a major part of his life was missing. But I appreciate this man, because the text does not tell us that he's out there with help. It does not tell us that he's out there with people trying to guide him around, that in spite of his blindness, he's trying to carve out some individualness about himself. And that's when he meets Jesus and the disciples. And the disciples do what so many of us do in this moment. They see the man that's blind, and automatically they assume that the blindness had to be his fault. He said, what did he do? Or what did his parents do that has caused this calamity to be upon him? These disciples are like the world for many of us. And they see our condition, they see the pain that we struggle with, they see the wrestling and the uncertainty, and they assume, like the disciples, you must have did something. It's your fault you're in the position that you're in. For them, they could not understand why this man was blind. It had to be his fault. Let me help you. Because with all that's going on, it is easy for us to fall into the trap of assuming, like so many others, that we're at the place we're at, feeling what we're feeling because of something we have done. Here's the challenge. None of us could have seen the things that have taken place. None of us could have seen a global pandemic. None of us could have seen these things on our vision board for 2020. And here you are getting ready to move into the last month of the year, and you're feeling down, you're feeling depressed. You see your investments going down. You're struggling, trying to navigate. Am I going to work or am I going to stay home with the kids who are trying their best to learn virtually? There you are, stuck in a situation you did not create, but yet it's your lot in life. And I need you to help me. I need you to understand. I need you to lean in close, child of God, because I need you to understand that Jesus brings clarity to this man, and he brings clarity to you and I. Because there's so many people that want us to personalize this particular issue. They want us to make it think it's our fault. But watch how Jesus flips the script. Jesus says, listen, y'all messed it up. It's not because he's done wrong. It's not because his parents have done wrong. This is going to still be for the sole purpose of bringing glory to God. And I appreciate Jesus changing the perspective for the man, because in this blindness that the man has been crippled with his entire life, Jesus flips the script as if to release the man from the fact that he wants him to know this blindness does not define you. And just because others may want to put you in a box, you've got to work extra hard to make sure you don't personalize this issue. Yes, you're blind, but it's not your end. Yes, you're struggling. And yes, there are things that people are looking at you that are making assumptions, but you cannot allow their assumptions to make you view your own self a certain way. And I need many of us to know this, because there is perhaps maybe the most fundamental thing of the stigma that we wrestle with, is that for you and I and many people who struggle with mental health concerns and emotional roller coasters and all these other things, for some reason people want to make us think that it's our fault. No, hear me clearly, that just because it's an issue and just because it may weigh you down does not mean it has to define who you are. And perhaps the only way we can deal with it is we must understand that in the midst of all that we are wrestling with, we still have value in the economy of God. Yes, I know it's painful. Yes, I know that this causes a lot of things to happen in your life. But understand, just as Jesus told the man and the disciples, he simply said, this is going to still be for the glory of God. What if I told you that even those moments of uncertainty when you're wrestling and things are happening and there are issues, mental scars that have been forged because of the pain you're wrestling with, whether it may be this issue or that problem or that relationship, let me tell you that you don't have to define yourself by that dysfunction. Yes, I'm blind, but I know this is still going to be for the glory of God. Yes, I'm struggling, but this is still going to be for the glory of God. Let me help you that it's going to be a constant thing for you and I, like this man in this moment, to resist the temptation. It's easy to just say, well, I'm blind, that's it. It's easy to just say, this is how it's going to be. But in this passage of Scripture, Jesus sends out the clarion call that this is not just for you, it's for others. Your glory of God will be revealed in this moment of your blindness. And I know oftentimes we wrestle with this, but it's been one of the things I've been leaning on, especially in this season, is that as I begin to continue to see how God is recognized in the world, I understand that God's recognition is only through revelation, which means that many times it takes things in order for us to see God work. I know right now, in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of social unrest, in the midst of a crazy political season, understand that it is in moments like this we get to see the totality of who God is. Hear me clearly. You don't know He's a healer until you've been sick. You don't know He's a way maker until doors have been closed in your face. You don't know He's a mind regulator and a heart fixer until your mind has been crazy and your heart has been broken. Hear me clearly, that what happens is that God oftentimes shows Himself the best in moments that feel like the worst. And it is in this season that we began to epitomize. This is what we learn, and I need you to hear me clearly and feel my heart in this moment. You are bigger than what you're going through. Your value is greater than the things you're wrestling with. Hear me clearly, that for some reason what you're struggling with is still going to bring glory to God. So we must be like this man in our text. We must go about the business of resisting the temptation that oftentimes we do to try to personalize the issue. But not only do we have to resist the temptation, but number two, hear this, if we overcome the stigma of getting some help, we must go about embracing the messy reality that accompanies our deliverance. I want you to know that healing is oftentimes messy. It's not clean cut. It's not always going to make sense. And let's be real, it's not always going to feel good. This story is intriguing to me because this is one of the few miracles that Jesus performs that the person who needed the miracle didn't ask for it. This was not where the man came seeking Jesus. It's where Jesus saw the man and decided to heal him. I love that because I will tell you that gave me a little hope, especially in my own particular time, because sometimes you can be so inundated with your dysfunction, you don't even think you need healing. I could make the argument that maybe the man, since he was born blind, never thought that sight was ever possible for him. So he just assumed that blindness was going to be my lot in life until he had this chance encounter with Jesus. And then Jesus does something for him he did not even ask for. Isn't that amazing? About our God that loves us so much that even when we get settled, when we get stuck, when we just assume that this is how it's going to be, Jesus will always intercede on our behalf. And even though the man didn't ask for a miracle, Jesus provided it for him. But the way He provided it for him did not come in a way you and I perhaps would want to have it come, because the text tells us that this is what Jesus does. He spits in the ground, forms a mud cake, and puts the mud on the man's eyes. In order to heal the man, He put mud on the man's eyes. Now, I could go into all the spiritual applications there. For them, in that day, saliva represented the essence of a person. This is not in their context as nasty as you and I would consider it, but I would submit to you that you must remember that this is taking place in a public sphere. Jesus is not doing this in a private moment, but when He places the mud on the man's eyes, He's doing this in full view of His disciples and others. Which meant that in order for this miracle to take place, it was not going to look good. Because here's the thing that's so interesting as I began to really think through this narrative, is that he meets Jesus blind, but he leaves Jesus blind and with mud on his face. I could make the argument that his leaving of Jesus was worse than when he met with Jesus. Because when he met Jesus, he was just blind. But when he leaves Jesus, he's blind with dirt on his face. And I know this may sound strange, and I know I may get a few emails, and I know I may get some DMs concerning this, but I know it perhaps goes against some of our common notion. But this text is plain and clear that there's sometimes you're going to leave Jesus a little worse than when you met him. And can I be okay living life with dirt on my face? See, here's the crazy thing. Again, it's in public, which means people saw the dirt on his face. And can I be okay as I'm in the process of healing and everyone else knowing I'm in the process? Can I be okay if I'm still blind and I got mud on my face? And I know we want clean miracles, and I know we want things that ultimately will make us look good in the view of others, but there are some moments when in order to get the best out of us, God, watch this, has to make us look like a mess. I could make the argument that Jesus needed the mud on the man's face because his instructions to the man was go to the pool of Siloam. Some have argued that the mud on the face added the extra fuel that the man needed in order to go to the place that Jesus sent him. Sometimes God has to make us look and feel worse in order to push us to do something about it. Because sometimes you won't go to the pool unless you got mud on your face. And sometimes Jesus dirties up our situation in order to force us to a place where we can get made clean. Sometimes God makes that job situation, that relationship issue, and all that stuff get dirtier to make you go to the pool. Sometimes we must understand that in God's economy, in God's way, and in God's work, that He does what is necessary to make us do what we need to do to complete our healing. Sometimes He breaks your heart to the total place where you have no choice but to leave. Sometimes He gets us to the place where we can cry no more tears in order to get us to the place where we have to make the step that we were hesitant about taking because He knows where we need to be. I can make the argument the blind man never would have went to the pool unless he had mud on his face. What is Jesus muddying up to make you make the step towards the pool that He's sending you to? What is He doing in this moment that is forcing you to now have to go get some help? What rock bottom has He allowed you to experience in order for you to now realize I can no longer act like I'm fine? I got to go to the pool. And I know, my brothers and sisters, here's the challenge. God had to make it dirtier for him to understand that the pool would be a necessity for his healing. Because as long as he was just blind, he was just going along life as usual. But when he was blind with mud on his face, he was then more apt to listen to the instruction of the Lord and go to the pool. Resist the temptation to personalize our issue. Embrace the messy reality that accompanies our deliverance.
Thank you for joining us. If you were blessed by today's message, there are several ways to view it again for free and play it back anytime and anywhere. Visit our YouTube channel, TBC Augusta GA, and our website, tbcaugusta.org. You can also download the Tab Impact app from the Apple Store or Google Play. As always, thank you for worshiping with us at the most impactful place on the planet, the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church.